create and design. And since this is Saudi Design Week, we want to make sure that we open up the aperture on creativity and we really expand our minds to figure out the 6 degrees of separation that brings fashion to the foreground. So if you think about fashion, ordinarily we think about Paris, right? We think about that's the epicenter of fashion. And it was an Englishman who actually brought fashion to Paris, and it was a German who actually almost took fashion from Paris. So we're going to take a trip down memory lane, and then we're going to end up at Versailles in 1973, November 28th, for the watershed moment for American ready-to-wear. Are you guys ready for that journey?
Yes.
All right. Am I ready for the technology is a better question. So we're going to start with World War II, and that's probably not the place you would think I would start when I'm talking about fashion, right? So in World War II, the Germans had taken over France, and one of the things that they actually wanted was fashion. They wanted to actually move all of the couture houses from Paris to Berlin. So that was the situation. Not only did they want to rule the world, they wanted to rule fashion as well. So many of the couturiers fled Germany. A lot of them actually stayed. And an American-born woman by the name of Josephine Baker joined the French resistance and helped Lucien Lelong save the couture houses from the Nazis. And that's how Paris remained strong during World War II. So there's Josephine Baker, who's going to play an important role in the story as we get to 1973. At that moment, she's in the resistance, and she's a soldier fighting for France. And this gentleman is Lucien Lelong. Are you guys familiar with him? How many of you are fashion designers? Fashion historians? Fashion students? Have you heard of this man? Okay, so homework for later, Google Lucien Lelong and learn about his fashion house, and also learn about the fact that he helped save couture in Paris during World War II. You're welcome. So another person who's going to play a very important role in this story that we're going to craft and tell together is Gerald Vanderkamp. At this point, Gerald is a young man who's a curator, and he had one job during World War II, and that was to save the Mona Lisa. So during the war, he slept with the Mona Lisa every night to make sure that it wasn't stolen. So keep this in mind as we get closer to 1973, because he would become the curator of Versailles, and he would be the one that would try to alleviate the $60 million in debt that Versailles would be in 1973. So this is New York. So meanwhile, while all these things are happening in Europe, Berlin is trying to take over Paris, Gerald Vanderkamp sleeping with the Mona Lisa, there's a woman by the name of Eleanor Lambert. She's a fashion publicist. She loves American designers. She loves American fashion. And at this moment, she had a great idea. And sometimes it only takes a gem of one idea to really change the world. And the idea she had was, let's create New York Fashion Week. We can't fly to Paris right now. It's under siege. We can't get any couture clothes. We have some American designers here. Why don't we create our own fashion week? It was in 1943 that she had that idea, and she created it, and it's still with us today, right? Has anyone been to New York Fashion Week? We can thank World War II for New York Fashion Week, because that's how it all started. And so the Americans came, and we liberated France. And if we fast forward about 40 years later, actually it's about 30, to the south of France, Eleanor Lambert meets a man by the name of Gerald Vanderkamp, who is the gentleman who slept with the Mona Lisa and the curator of Versailles. She meets him in the south of France, and they start a conversation. And he says, gosh, Eleanor, I think I'm in trouble. We need $60 million to restore the Chateau de Versailles. What can we possibly do to raise that money? Do you know what she said? Let's have a fashion show. That's how you solve the world's problems, right? Let's have a fashion show. So they thought about it, and they said, this is a really good idea. We can have a fashion show, we can raise the money, and we can save the palace. So they started out by putting 5 French designers with 5 American designers. And they called this event the Grand Divertissement. Fancy word to say fashion show at the palace. And to start off, they decided to have Pierre Cardin. They had Yves Saint Laurent. They had Marc Bohan for Christian Dior, Givenchy, and Ungaro. Those were the 5 designers who would represent France in this fashion show. Are you guys familiar with any of them? Have you worn any of them? Do you like them? So would you say at this moment in time in 1973, these were probably 5 of the best designers on the planet?
No.
Yes, no?
No.
Now? Now and then? Okay, well in New York we didn't think so. We said, you know what, you guys have your guys, but some of our guys are just as good. So Eleanor Lambert said, I'll take your 5 Frenchmen, and I'll put 5 Americans with it, and we'll have ourselves a fashion show. And that fashion show became known as the Battle of Versailles, because when you put French designers with American designers in a room, you definitely get a little bit of a battle. So she started out with, any guesses? Halston, exactly right. Bill Blass, a designer no one knew at the time. She took a big risk. She brought an African-American designer by the name of Stephen Burrows. She took an even bigger risk. She brought a woman, Anne Klein. And then she brought a guy who was kind of young at the time, Oscar de la Renta, and that made her Olympic fashion team. So you've got the French team and you have the American team meeting at Versailles, which at this point still needed the $60 million to fix itself. So they put this fashion show together. And they asked a couple people to really help. They knew they needed money, none of which they had, so they asked the Baron de Rothschild to help, and she became the host committee chair. On the American side, CZ Guest became the American host committee chair. So you had these big heavyweights on both sides of the Atlantic. So you had the moneyed Paris people, the moneyed American people, and together they were going to help sell tickets so they can raise this money. So they had a really, if you look at this list, this is kind of the who's who of the world in 1973. So each side formulated their host committee. They charged about $250 for the tickets, and all of the money went to Versailles to help defray the $60 million that they needed. I mean, the Americans were in a bit of a pickle because the French, they had the Baron and the Baroness, and they decided to put about $1 million in production. The Americans had about $30,000 for their production, so it's a bit of an unbalance going into this fashion show. But they had a couple of people who volunteered. Liza Minnelli, she said, I'll sing in the fashion show and represent America. And they had Kay Thompson, who was her grandmother, who was a Broadway star. So these were like the 2 big names that they had on the American side. On the French side, they had Rudolph Nureyev, they ended up getting Josephine Baker, they had Zizi Jeanmaire, they had every French actor and star, they had elephants, they had rockets, they had basically a big circus, because they had $1 million to work with. So with the $30,000 the Americans had, they had to find models with that money as well. And a lot of the models turned their nose up at the fact that it was only about $300 for the week, and no one wanted to come. So if you look at the list, Lauren Hutton said no, Angelica Houston said no, then she said yes, then she said maybe. So what they were left with were African-American models. They were the only ones they could afford, and so they took a bigger risk, and they had 36 models, 12 of whom would be African-American models, which for America at that time is a big risk. It was a big decision to do that. But Eleanor Lambert had this vision, and she believed in this vision, and she believed that she could bring a level of change and a level of surprise to France. And she only had a small budget. She didn't have enough money, and those were the only girls that showed up at her audition. So she had to work with what she had. And each of the designers had to vote on the girls. You had to have 5 votes. And once they had the 5 votes, they took Broadway dancers and they took models, and off they went to Paris. Halston flew first class, and everyone else was on Olympic Airlines in coach. And the rumor has it that they danced in the aisles, they popped champagne, they basically made an American nuisance of themselves on the plane in coach, but they had a really good time. And that's kind of when the good time ended, because when they got to Paris, they didn't receive a warm reception. They didn't have a warm welcome at all. As a matter of fact, the French took all the rehearsal time. They didn't feed them. They didn't even put toilet paper in the bathrooms. It was a bit of are they mad at us? Do they like us? What's going on? And so the American team started to fall apart. Halston started fighting with Oscar. Oscar started fighting with Bill. No one spoke with Anne Klein because she was a woman. And Stephen Burroughs hadn't finished his clothes in New York, so he had to continue to sew. So it was a bit of a mess. Have you guys ever felt that? You have a big project that's due, and the wheels start to come off. The deadlines are looming. You owe something to a client. The dress isn't ready. The PowerPoint isn't ready. The technology isn't working. That's what was happening to them. Their props were actually designed in centimeters instead of yards. There was a bit of a translation problem. So when they got to the stage, their props were about this big, like the size of a postcard. It was supposed to cover the back of the stage. So they had to do away with the props. The music in the orchestra they had didn't work, so they had to do away with the music. So it was really becoming a big mess. And meanwhile, the French had an incredible 40-piece orchestra. They had a director. They had stage managers, they had a lighting manager, they had hair and makeup, they had everything. And the rehearsals became a nightmare. This is actually the original schedule, and the French didn't stick to it. They actually took 8 hours a day. By the time they finished, it was about 2 a.m., and then the Americans got a chance to rehearse. And then finally, the big night came. It was quite a night. It was probably the first convergence of fashion, film, all sorts of creativity, all sorts of money, supporting the arts in a very interesting way. It was the first time in the history of arts culture that it was a sponsored event. Monsanto, Revlon, and Max Factor all sponsored this event. So it was a revolution in a lot of ways. It was a revolution in terms of fundraising. It was a revolution in terms of sponsored events. And it was a revolution in terms of art, fashion, and film all meeting together in one house. Much like what you guys are doing here for Saudi Design Week. You're bringing all the movers and shakers in fashion and design and film together so that you can have a meeting of like-minded people to really create something and move something forward. And that's what they were doing in 1973. That's why everyone bought the tickets, including Andy Warhol. This is a video that should be playing for you guys right now, but it doesn't look like it's going to play. Maybe some tech support, I can play that for you in a quick second. One of the interesting things in the video, they talk about the fact that in this room on that night were 650 of the richest people on the globe, on the planet, in attendance. So you had a very good audience to make a statement about social change. You had a very wonderful opportunity to talk to social change, and that's what they did. And even Princess Grace showed up. So we're getting audio and no video.
The French Rothschilds, headed by Baroness Marie-Hélène.
I'm going to change this for a second, if you guys will indulge me. So maybe we can get this to play for you. Is that okay? If you guys indulge me for a second? Because I want you to see it. It's really important and fun.
Gave up the lease. A party whose 650 guests paid $250 apiece.
This played really well during the rehearsal, you guys, I have to tell you. Yep.
So-called working princess present was Grace of Monaco, née Kelly, who wore the Grimaldi family jewels, diamond and ruby tiara and necklace. The French Rothschilds, headed by Baroness Marie-Hélène, more or less ran the show. They will give it so-called working princess present was Grace of Monaco, née Kelly, who wore the Grimaldi family jewels, diamond and ruby tiara and necklace. The French Rothschilds, headed by Baroness Marie-Hélène.
So the point of this is, everyone was really dressed to the nines. They looked great, they were fabulous, and they were in the mood for what was going to be a battle for the French, taking over the Americans and making the Americans quite embarrassed. Unlike this moment right now when I can't get this video to play. But, and that's the way the French went into this thinking. They had everything, they had all of the stars, and they would put on the world's best fashion show. And that's what they had in mind. And they began. And it was very beautiful. It was very surreal. And it lasted 2.5 hours. They had more props than they had people in the audience. They had performances, they had ballet, they had a circus, and they also showed clothes. And after the 2.5 hours, the Americans showed up, and they took 33 minutes, and they changed fashion. Yes, Liza Minnelli came out and sang Bonjour Paris. Each of the designers showed clothes that were of American style. They had models that walked to a new type of music called disco because they had lost their original music, so they had to play the music they had with them, and that was disco. And they actually walked and strutted, and that was the strut you guys now know when you see models on the runway that do the horsey walk. It began this night, November 28, 1973, with the black models that brought this movement from the street, and they brought it to Paris at the Chateau de Versailles. And this is a look at the women who helped change fashion, that brought American ready-to-wear to the world on November 28, 1978. This is a look at some of the clothes. This is 73, so they brought color, they brought jersey, they brought wrap dresses. They brought a different look for the hair, they brought a different body structure, and a different way to walk. And they definitely brought a different presentation style, completely bare, no props, just beautiful clothes on beautiful people moving down the aisles. And the Battle of Versailles, as we know it, became the French were good, but the Americans were great. And that is a story, without the videos, of how America went to Paris and created American ready-to-wear for the entire world. So the point of this story during Saudi Design Week is that sometimes you can have a small idea and you band together as a team, and there may be a little bit of fighting along the way. But once you put it together, it becomes something so big that it changes the entire world. It changes the world of fashion, the world of film, the world of design. And that's what this event did, and that's what your event can do here. When you have a little bit of curiosity, and you have a whole lot of energy and a whole lot of commitment, you can change the entire world. And let's hope video number 3 will actually play for you. We can see it, but we can't. You know what? I'm going to take a little bit of Cameron's time, and I'm actually going to play this video for you because I want you to see it. Is that okay, Mr. Silver?
It's okay.
Absolutely.
I'll talk fast.
Okay, you talk fast. I'm going to actually play the video because I think they should see it. So, that is the story of Versailles 73, where you can read the lips of all of the people in the film. And if you haven't seen it, I must say it's a tremendously funny, entertaining, and historical flick, and you can check it out at Harvey Nichols. They're showing it for the rest of the week during Saudi Design Week. And they also have it on another computer, and they're going to show it to you as well. So we came a little bit prepared. If one doesn't work, we have a backup. So stay tuned. And in the interim, Sean's going to kill me, but I'm going to switch it up for a second while they set that up and see if there are any questions. Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions while we solve for technical difficulties? I know you're curious, so you can ask. Any? Yes, please.
Did the Americans actually sell fashion as well after this, or was it just
Well, that's a very good question. So that night, the French began to buy the clothes right off the Americans, and American ready-to-wear became something you recognize in stores. It also laid the groundwork for Americans to start to run some of the French companies, and it led to a lot of commercialization and globalization. So at that point, people believed that the Americans only copied French fashion. And so that night, when Americans brought the looks from the street, something that was different, something that had not been a French pattern, people started to take notice of